I'm going to introduce our panellists now in a minute as well, but just to tell you the format, it's going to be a chat with these impressive guys, and I leave 10-15 minutes towards the end to take questions from the floor. I think there's a roving mic, but I have a feeling that it is intimate enough that we'll be able to hear you, and I can repeat the questions to the panel. So we'll get to that. If you have questions, maybe hold on to those. And I'll try and get out for the 4:30 in case people have to get the green line or fight the traffic or whatever, you know. I know one person here is only going down the road, Michael, so delighted for you. Whereas other people may have to get a horse or wherever they're going. So go to Galway, there we go. So the title of this one, as you've seen, is Security Leadership 2026, What Keeps CISOs Awake at Night. And I have to say, these guys here look remarkably relaxed and unstressed.
It's not night time yet.
Which,
tonight,
which is what, well, I was taken that it meant that you were just really buoyed up by the resilience building work in progress that you've heard about today. So I'm hoping that that's it. But if not, I think, you know, we will tackle kind of some of the big subjects today and take some takeaways home to try and percolate what you might have heard today. Because today covered a lot of ground from geopolitical disruption, which was spoken about this morning, AI-powered attacks, regulatory pressure, ransomware resilience, and the challenge of protecting critical infrastructure. So we have really inspirational security leaders here from all across the Irish industry. They're going to reflect on what they've heard, share what's resonated with them, and hopefully add a candid perspective on the decisions that will define cybersecurity leadership this coming year, or the coming 12 months. So hopefully an honest conversation. Feel free to jump in, guys, particularly if you disagree with each other. I'm here for it. But also things like skill shortages, practical considerations you may have yourselves, board level expectations, AI governance, and what it takes to keep us secure in the coming year. So I have here, and I'll have to check that I'm in the right order, Paul C. Dwyer, who's president of the International Cyber Threat Task Force. We have, thank you, Patrick. We have Patrick Burgess, who's co-founder of Nutmore Limited, educator, and GTIA. We have, oh, fantastic. Norman stood in. Yes, Norman. So Norman is also standing in, much like myself, but obviously an upgrade as well. Also, please don't tell Michael Conway, Managing Director of Renaissance, who's been hosting this expo for years, that I said that. But Norman Newell is the Sales Director of Renaissance. And we have Kevin Reid, who is the head of cybersecurity in the VM group. And we have Neil Mullen, who is Chief Information Security Officer of the HSE, no small job, no small organisation. So I'm going to kick us off with a few, I suppose, a common question to everybody here around what you might have sat through today, what you've heard, and I suppose, what is the one thing that you've heard and that you'll genuinely take back to your organisation or to your clients or to your mentees? Now, Paul, you probably know everything already, I don't know, but if there was something that you've observed,
every day's a learning day, but
you might need to take, sorry, there's three.
So on the, unfortunately I'm going to start off with something a little bit downbeat, which is, there's a common theme of when I talk to people today, which was, we're going, we get it, we get what you're saying, great presentation, yada yada, all that good stuff, but basically there's an attitude out there of almost cynicism towards things like AI, regulation, cybersecurity rules and everything else like that. And Irish people and companies unfortunately have this DNA of it'll be grand. And that's the problem. And that it'll be grand DNA was in pretty much every second conversation I was having today with people down there going, so that's mad stuff you're talking about, that's amazing, all that. And it's all factual, but at the end of it, that wouldn't bother us with it. And it doesn't matter what you do when you explain to people that the biggest internet companies in the world are all here in Ireland, that we have the EU presidency in July for 6 months, that we have a moral obligation to do something about the effects I talked about and the risks of AI here. And now we go, oh, but that's gas. It's almost you're in Father Ted or a crossover in Twilight Zone to kill the Scully. That's what it feels like sometimes, unfortunately, when you talk in the professional space on that. Now, that's not everybody. But that there's a lot of people who are dealing with that challenge. So vendors who are out there and experts I met out there today are all meeting this challenge with businesses. Now, why are they? Because the businesses they're dealing with are not being given clear direction of what you're meant to do. The EU AI Act has put, it's a law, it's an act, it's in force, and it put things on resellers and distributors today. When I talked to the room this morning, none of them knew. Why?
You look at that happened with GDPR as well,
Yeah.
right? GDPR came in 2018, and GDPR to today is still something which people are going, oh, I'm meant to have an information security asset register. What's that? Like, well, you pick up a policy for data protection and it says 2018 May, you know, when they put their default data protection policy in. So trying to translate, and this I think is, of course, what you're saying, like, you know, taking what is a really important and trying to translate that into terms which people can understand and actually relate to, so they understand how it actually relates to them, is where that skill set lies, right? And what we have to do. And we have that opportunity to do that. We have the laws there, we're just not using them. And we're sort of almost seeing them as something which are optional.
Patrick, whose job is it to communicate it better? Is it at state level? I mean, a lot of this is coming from EU legislation, and we've always found, you mentioned GDPR, and I remember that even particularly hitting our organisation as a media organisation and going, oh God, who's in charge of this? Or, you know, where do we get the information from? So it was a good counterpoint. Like, who should be taking ownership of communicating it?
I think it's everyone's responsibility. Ultimately, though, until we can get the board level people, the people who are in charge of companies, to understand this and have a responsibility on them, which these laws actually say they do have, but they don't take seriously, and they consider it like fraud or all these other things that the companies can be accountable for. You know, until the people are actually held accountable to it, that's the key thing. It's the accountability of these things that really matters.
I think that's a really good question you've asked, because there's a vacuum there at the moment if you're waiting on the Irish government to tell you what to do with AI or DORA or NIS2 or whatever. There's just an obviously huge vacuum there. That vacuum is being filled in by the companies offering the free AI training courses. That's a cult. They're out with their Bibles and they're banging on them and saying, believe in this Jeebus, and all the rest, right? And they get you to follow that particular train of thought, and then that becomes the doctrine that everybody will follow. This morning when we talked through things, we talked about the risks to humans, the risks to systems and everything, but we also pepper that up with the fact that this is the best time ever to be an innovator, an entrepreneur, everything. Everybody has a full development team at their disposal for $20 a month. You can develop anything you want. It's an amazing time to innovate and do those things, but you need to do it with the guardrails and the ethics. My point I'm making before that was in relation to the fact that if people keep seeing cybersecurity and protecting people's data and doing the right thing as a burden, then they're missing the game. This is an investment you make in your business so that you establish trust. Why is Revolut the biggest bank with 40 million customers, and they have an app and no one's ever been in a Revolut building? Right? Do they even really exist? Because they got the digital trust thing right, and they did it really, really well. Okay? And that went from marble floors going into banks, brass fittings, big columns to go down to College Green, and see how we used to give people trust was with big buildings, big facades. Now you have to do it digitally on an app. How do you do that? And that's where all of this legislation can help you, because if you're doing things in line with that and you can prove you are, then what are you doing? You're gaining trust and you're demonstrating trust overtly. And that's what you need to do. That's the trick to this.
So
Kevin, yeah.
Yeah, just from a perspective of accountability, I think is a strong point. But I think when we look at regulations, they're kind of catching up with what the expectations are. So, for instance, anything that's outlined in NIS2, I would be recommending to our clients working in the consultancy field. I mean, these are the things we would have been implementing already. So it's actually now, it's a benefit to you to have these.
Yeah.
If you have them already, and if you're catching up, it's good to catch up because it's going to protect you as an organization. And it's, you know, if you're waiting for somebody else, there's not going to be somebody else. It's, you know, if you're in the IT field within an organization or the security field, get in front of your board and start to explain those risks to them, because they need to understand it, and then they are accountable, and they're the ones who can make the decisions whether they need to do investment. And, you know, there's massive gaps. And all the conversations that we have about, you know, the current threats, and there's plenty of them out there, I still, and we were just discussing it beforehand, myself and Patrick, it's the basics are still not being done. You know, are you patching correctly? You're monitoring your perimeter. How are you doing these things? And these are the things that we see coming up time and time again. So it's a catch-up aspect to it, but, you know, it's, I think, you know, these regulations, they're pain to begin with, GDPR to begin with, was something we thought, okay, this is a serious overhead. But look at us as individuals in the EU. Are we better to be living here or to be living in the United States where, you know, they have the Patriot Act and so forth, where all your information is fully available to the American government? You know, so it's beneficial to the citizens of the EU, it's beneficial to organizations, and it's also something that, you know, everyone should be doing.
So understand the game you're in. Norman, can I ask, because obviously Renaissance is sort of, I think if you've been in the centre of the community here, so you're seeing quite a lot of what's happening vendor side, but also an organisational kind of, I suppose, challenges. What's your take on the day then? Do you recognise this portrait of kind of readiness, or even go a step ahead before that, as Paul points out, is like the willingness to be ready? I was going to go to the room and say, taken from your line, Paul, who thinks it's grand, we'll be grand, and just literally do it. Actually, yeah, who thinks it'll be grand?
No one's going to put that.
See, you've got the very, yeah, these people are bought in, so I think this is a good room to speak to. But Norman, what's your take on it?
So my take is, look, when I've been talking to people today and I've been listening to what people are saying, and one of the things that Paul mentioned was, you know, a distributor's liabilities. I wasn't unaware of that, you know, and I'll put my hand up, and I suggest a lot of the resellers are unaware of it as well. So it's important that, you know, one of the things we need to all take away from this as resellers, end users, and distributors, that we have a responsibility to be able to make sure that our people are prepared for it, we know what we're giving. But also the other issue I'm hearing all the time is resource. We want to be able to do this. We know we need to be able to do this, but where do we get the resource to be able to do it? And I think that's one of the biggest issues that all of us are going to face. AI isn't going anywhere. You know, it's there. It's going to be, every single one of us in this room is already affected, and it's going to get a whole lot worse. I don't think it's something we need to fear. I think it's something we need to embrace, but we've got to do it safely.
Neil, obviously the HSE, I don't think we could accuse the HSE of not being aware of the worst case scenario, because the worst case scenario has to a certain extent happened 5 years ago now, that predates your time, with the very publicised, sorry about that, breach at the time. And I suppose the HSE is in that position, like a lot of those large organisations where your clients are, it's extremely public facing, you've millions of stakeholders who, and they recognise when there's downtime, when there's been an issue. So I would imagine it's not a case of having the conversation now, it's so mandatory to be ahead of it. So, I mean, have you heard things today that you're going, okay, I can see people are on the right road, or have you advice to share from someone who may be a few steps ahead?
Thanks for assuming we're a few steps ahead.
I love to be positive and make
45 minutes
yeah.
ago, so I didn't hear any of the speeches, so apologies. I think I can't outsource accountability. I'm accountable. So you ask the question, who's accountable? I'm accountable, and if you're a CISO in the room, you're accountable, in my opinion. And whether, you know, I lean on people like the gents here to sort of help us deliver that message. I am accountable to make sure that message is delivered and is understood, and it's done in the most simple way as possible. So I work in a very heavily regulated environment. I work in a very dispersed environment with lots of different people that have their own opinion on what we shouldn't do. So everything we do needs to be broken down into the most basic components and look at how do we do this in the fastest route possible. How do we reuse and recycle activity, and how do we deliver an outcome that is compliant and deliver on a compliance activity? So we don't have a compliance team in my department. We're not going to have a compliance team in my department. There's no intent that I want one. We need to deliver on something that is compliant, and the natural outcome of what we do delivers on compliance, and that needs to be the frame of mind going into what we do. So, you know, really some of the strategy we develop is like, you know, doing fewer things, doing them better, doing them to a wider community. And that is simplifying what we do. So I always sort of lean into the story that, like, you know, if you're running down the stairs with a 200-page PDF and you come to page 89, and whether that's a regulatory meeting or a fire or a cyber attack, like, you failed. Like, you know, you can't sort of work in that environment. We have an abundance of regulations that Paul has mentioned already, and you probably won't get through them all if you're here talking about them all day long. But if we deliver something once, we reuse that again and again and again. We don't deliver on multiple versions of the same control, depending on what building you're in. And that is a way of simplicity and delivering in a simple way. It's also a way of making sure that people actually understand what the regulatory requirement is. And it is feeding into our overall resilience. It is helping us to become more resilient and for us, in a calm and collected way, to be able to deliver on our requirements and our objectives. So yeah, I'm accountable and I have to own that accountability. And that's sort of where it ends for me. Like, you know, I can't outsource accountability.
It's interesting to hear, you know, as large scale an organisation as the HSE, having to kind of, I suppose, looking at and boiling it down to saying we need a certain amount of simplicity. Like you said, flicker for where are the exits? You know, it's on page 92 and the house is burning down around you. That's probably, it's interesting to hear the HSE is feeling that way, because other organisations who are not the HSE, who one assumes has a large enough team but still has to prioritise, is still triaging, and I didn't mean that to be a pun, I've realised it may be to do with healthcare, but triaging what to tackle first rather than trying to tackle all of the things. Is that something that makes sense?
Yeah, but sorry, just on that point, so like
Yeah.
I could walk around the room outside and like, you know, take a business card from every reseller in the room, and I'm sure all their products are going to help. But if I had all of their products, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm suddenly secure and I'm compliant and I'm resilient and I'm any better off than I was yesterday. It just means I've got a big bill.
Yeah.
And I'm now managing a massive ecosystem, with massive duplication, massive unnecessary, you know, requirements there. And I'm not criticising anyone. There's obviously some brilliant solutions there, but you need the basics in place first. You need to sort of get some like fundamental capabilities in place first and feel comfortable with that, and feel really comfortable in the heat of the moment. That like when something happens and you're pulling people together, people know what the capabilities are before you start piling on technology, because technology isn't the answer.
Yeah, what we see this all the time. Like, the technology is almost confusing people. Like, we have all these acronyms and terms and terminologies that nobody outside this room really understands and cares about. Like, what we need to do is translate this into something that is understood by people who are not us, and that's risk, and that's business knowledge, and that's the consequences of it going wrong, like the financial consequences, the reasons why it's going to matter to that board or to that person or to that regulated industry. Because ultimately, they couldn't care less which of those vendors we're using to do the protection. As I said, there's so many different endpoint protection companies, most of which will do a similar kind of job, and they'd all argue over that, which one's better. But ultimately, what's that trying to achieve? And what's it trying to protect against within the limited budget, the limited time, and the limited ability that we have as organisations and professionals to do that? And if we don't put it back to risk and back to need, then I think we're losing before we even start.
How do you prioritise then? How do you help people prioritise?
You need to look at
before we
things
do
that are
it?
going to be repeatable and going to give you the biggest impact on the return on your investment, and things like incident management, vendor risk management, understanding your regulations, understanding risk, being able to speak in a sort of coherent way at a board meeting these are all really important. Like, you know, cybersecurity being in the basement with hoods, and like, you know, those days are gone, and if you're in that space, you're not going to be successful.
Well, I think, like you were saying like earlier, like GDPR already tells us simple things like an information asset register tells us what our information is, where is it. Knowing what your data is and where your data is allows you to prioritise what you protect and what you use to protect. If you haven't got an information asset register or anything written down, or you don't know where your data is, then you're wasting your time and your money because you don't understand what you're trying to protect. We've got to understand what we're trying to protect first, and so many we don't.
Yeah, there's the other side of this. Sorry, the other side of this is, and it's good to echo what Neil is saying, because Neil is coming from a different perspective than all of us here. He gets it holistically, and he understands that when he looks at systems, he can't boil the ocean, and he's protecting lives, pain, and suffering in human beings by protecting that ecosystem, that environment. That's a lot different than dealing with something like DORA and the regulations around protecting a wealth management company. But what the legislation does have in place, and there's some similarities around all of this, are things, for example, like being able to categorize what is on that radar. What is your CIBFs, your critical important business functions? And they have the parameters around those and the filters around them, so you can decide, well, these are the things that the board needs to be accountable for. But one of the pieces there, and it was great to hear Neil saying it, was that he can't outsource accountability. That is the commonality between the EU AI Act, NIS2 directive, DORA, the UK Operational Resilience Framework, everything. This is one of these paradigm shifts that everything's different. The board are accountable for all of this. We heard there in relation to NIS too, but the difference is, yes, everything that Kevin was saying is absolutely true. These are kind of mundane things. Cyber hygiene is all that's really in NIS too, and it's all the kind of stuff you should have been doing. But the big piece that's in there that wasn't in stuff before, the management board are responsible for all of this. You can't blame your IT manager, you can't blame your vendor, you're on the hook for all of this. And that's the difference in it. And also, these are guardrails. They're telling you what you should be doing, not the specifics. So how you do that is up to you, but you need to prove that you have delivered the outcome that they're looking for. Can you detect, have you an asset inventory? You know, can you detect when something goes wrong? Can you respond? Can you recover? And can you learn from those incidents? They're the kind of things they want to see proof that you can actually do these things. And that's what they want to see. It's not a checklist of 150 things or 300 things you need to do. And that's why, again, Neil is bang on there. This isn't about buying a silver bullet. Products help, right? But this is a leadership challenge. All of these things are a leadership challenge. And how do you get excited about innovation? How do you get excited about embracing all this kind of technology and not get fearful? And we've already referred to it. I think all of us pretty much here, it's a bit of a pain and you've got to deal with all this kind of stuff. It's not, it's a chance. It's an opportunity to invest and actually have a stable environment that you can innovate. When NIS 1 came in, sorry, last point.
Okay.
NIS 1 came in, the reason NIS 1 came in was it was going to add on 500 billion to the GDP of Europe. Why has Donald Trump stamped the EU AI Act? Because he doesn't want Europe to be successful in that space.
Can I just bring in Kevin, because he was waiting patiently.
No, it's fine. I'm pretty much being covered, and I suppose just to get the message through about accountability, what I have found is effective is tabletop exercises with boards. So a lot of people operate tabletop exercise, going through like what would reactions be during an incident, a cybersecurity attack, and actually if you're talking that through with them, you know, and a lot of them will engage in that type of activity, you know, rather than you come in and give these lengthy presentations and say, you know, it's going to cost your job, the Companies Act, all these different things. If you can actually make it somewhat realer for them, then they actually get, okay, well, what would you do if half of your processes are not working and you're being, you know, told you have to pay, you know, whatever, 2 or 3 Bitcoin to get them working? What would you do in that situation? And then it starts to make it a bit real for them, you know, and then they understand, okay, it's like the, you know, coming down the stairs with a 90-page document. You know, they don't know what to do, and it's trying to make those decisions. And then, okay, if we don't have this level of investment, and again, I totally agree with what Neil and everyone said, you know, products are fantastic, but it's people, processes, and the products together.
So it's creating that link between what we know accountability now lies with the boards, reminding them of that, and then going, and this is what it would look like, Neil, that you kind of described as well there. So is it easier than 2 years ago, we'll say, cybersecurity experts to actually have a voice at the table? Like, that's kind of a non-negotiable
I think
now.
I've been lucky over the years. So the organisation I've worked in have all given me access, or my management team access to the board, and I took it seriously. And I've been lucky that I've worked with and for companies that you know, would actually, you know, stop what they're doing and engage. But a lot of that's based upon, you know, my persistence, and I wasn't going away. And, you know, okay, you might throw me away today, but I'm going to go back tomorrow. I'm going to keep on coming back, and I'm going to, you know, I think also any board meeting I've ever been to, even if it's a deep dive, I don't think I've ever produced more than 4 pages of slides. Like, so I've never gone in with, like, you know, an engineering report about like CVEs and like, and all this type of stuff, because people glaze off, and you can see people going onto their email, and people pull their phones, and you've just lost the room, and it's difficult to get it back when you've lost the room. You're sort of almost better off just sort of wind it down, go, and come back and try again. But if you don't engage in a way that they understand, and my board are obviously medical staff and leaders from organisations around the country, so some of them are used to like certain terminology, some of them are used to certain approaches, and you've had to try to find a good mix that worked for getting the message across. But I think we've landed with that, and they're very engaged, incredibly engaged, and incredibly supportive. But it's all about delivering a message, and the message needs to be sort of, you know, crisp and clear, and, you know, no acronyms. I wouldn't even say the NCSE, like, type of thing. Any of the basics that you're talking about I wouldn't use it in the event that, like, we're sort of alienating someone in the room that's afraid to say, what does that mean, you know?
If you were to take a leap, Neil, then, because we're still probably talking about, you know, the basic compliance and sort of resilience against risk, or at least that it's built in. But then, Paul, you were addressing in your piece earlier this morning about, you know, the geopolitical shocks we've seen and have been, I mean, they've always been there, but they just feel more shocky, right, in the last few years. If we're kind of at a stage where we're like, you know, people are still having to get on board with, we need to do this, ignorance is not an excuse. The idea of factoring in geopolitical risks into your planning, your strategy.
We're factoring them in every day of the week.
You're
So
doing-
we started doing that about a year ago. You know, our risks aren't coming from around the corner. They're not coming from our front door. They could be coming from, you know, a president's office in another country. It could be coming from a basement in another country. But we need to be able to articulate that and make that meaningful for someone in the organisation to be able to say that, like, this risk is presenting this issue for us. And, you know, we talk about resilience, and it's a real buzzword at the moment, which is frustrating for me personally, because I don't know if people really understand what resilience means, like, you know, and what does resilience mean? And like, for me, you know, I can't say I'm going to serve my biggest customers. I can't say I'm going to only manufacture the most, you know, popular product. I have to deliver a service across the entire organisation. So we can't just sort of like say, well, you got a 4-hour RTO or a 10-hour RTO and I'll see you tomorrow, because we've got 8 hours to engage with you, and that doesn't work in the environment I'm in. So resilience means something radically different in that sort of setting.
You have the sort of high stakes hanging over you and your team the whole time. How does that translate for other organisations who may not feel the imperative, and they're just like, look, obviously that's the worst case scenario, but I have a lot on my plate. That's the kind of thing I can't deal with right now.
I think everyone has stakes. They're different, like, to that. But like, if it's an organisation, it needs to keep existing in some form, right? So you need to find a way, as the person responsible for this, to translate to the board and the people responsible, and as Paul said, the people who actually own this, because they don't understand that they own this a lot of the time, what the stakes are in a really simple way. And it was really nice to hear you say that. Like, like, so regularly you see technical people going in with long documents they're very proud of, that they think are really cool, and you watch the entire room just shut down and leave, because they don't get it, they don't care about any of this. So we have to find, as technical people and compliance people and regulatory people, ways to convey this and convey the stakes that matter to that organisation, because then they'll buy into what we're trying to achieve, which is there's a resilience in these pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, that's the key. That really is the key to this. I mean, you can go in and browbeat somebody about fines and all that kind of stuff, right? And that's going to have, like, you know, the quantitative side of risk. But you need to mix it up right back to the business impact it's going to have. So if you're talking to a CISO and you ask the CISO, how does that organization make money? And they go, well, I don't know. I'm working in the bank. I'm really cool at being a CISO, and I'm great at doing firewalls and vulnerability scans and all that good stuff, but I don't know how the bank makes money. Well, then you're basically a shit CISO, because you're not aligning your strategy with the strategy of the bank, with the client you're working for. You need to know what are the critical, important business functions, because if you highlight those when you're talking to the board, you'll get their buy-in, because that's what they care about. They don't care about you talking about CVE vulnerability 16434 or Unit 61398 at People's Liberation Army. That's edutainment. You're educating them and entertaining them at the same time. It's a sexy subject, cybersecurity, and they listen to you and they go, God, those geeks are mad. They have to realize they have a legal obligation to challenge everything you're saying. A legal obligation to challenge everything you're saying. That's the law under DORA and NIS 2. They have to challenge you and ask you, how do you know? How did you get that result? What did you do? And that all needs to be recorded in the minutes. That's the difference with these pieces of regulation and so on like that. And that's what oversight is, and that's what governance is. They're not just buzzwords. The demonstrable proof and evidence of that level 4 evidence are the minutes of a board meeting where somebody came in with a report and said, we did our vulnerability scanner, we did our pen test, whatever, here's what we found. And how did somebody challenge that? Just to go, well, I'm afraid to ask some questions because, God, he's really clever, isn't he? Or she, IT geek, whatever, blah, blah, blah. No, those days are gone. It all has to be a business conversation. Like, who knows what a business value chain is, and who knows what a supply chain is? Who knows what a business value chain is? You know what a business value chain is? Right. We should all know what a business value chain is. Because if you're dealing with cybersecurity, you need to know what a business value chain is. Because the best you're talking about is a supply chain. That is useless having a board level meeting unless you're talking about a business value chain. So that's a key takeaway. Work out how you talk to the business about the business value chain. That's all the board talks about, is the business value chain.
It sounds like the role of the well, I always pronounce it CISO, which shows how often I'm in contact with one, right?
Yeah.
CISO?
CISO, yeah.
That is obviously, like anything in that sphere, it's going to be evolving constantly, and that presumably is part of the, you know, the skill set needed. But it's evolving so quickly and with such impact if you get it wrong. Are we expecting too much from that role? Are there different types of CISOs? What kind of skill sets do they need? How many, do we need other people involved? I mean, obviously there are stakeholders across the business, you know, not just the board versus the cybersecurity, but like, Kevin, you've thought on that?
So I would work like as a virtual CISO, so multiple different types of businesses and organizations. And I suppose different to what Neil was saying is that level of accountability still lies within the organization. We'd support them, so it's virtual. It's a flavour of everything. You know, I often see the role of a CISO as you're the guy or the person in the room that's facing everyone else. So they have their ideas, like what Paul was saying, you know, they're trying to challenge you and you're trying to challenge them. So, you know, the adoption of AI, and obviously the massive benefits for productivity and so forth, but it's also we need to relay the message, okay, we're going to onboard different products, but what are the risks with that, and explain that at a business level. So it's multifaceted, different types of skill sets that you need, and obviously, you know, keeping yourself awake at night. Like when we engage with clients, you know, incident response and so forth, we don't say, you know, if you're going to have an incident, it's when it's going to happen and how can you reduce the likelihood of that happening. So it's more of a business role, but having an understanding of technology and so forth in the background as well, I'd say, is a critical piece. And communication is really the best, you know, focus that you can have as part of the role.
I think it's actually more than that, to be honest. I think if you look at the building behind us, Microsoft is probably customer. Their peak periods, the end of the year, they'll make, you know, 20% of their money in that last 24 hours of the day. You need to figure out how you're going to get that money processed. And if you think of you making a purchase of €100 million worth of licensing, we know that it's going to take us 2 hours to process that. Like, but I only need to do the first 12 minutes because all I need to do is recognize the sale. Then I've got 2 weeks to process it afterwards. So if something goes wrong, I know I have a dependency on someone in France to deliver something. I know I have a dependency on someone in the Philippines to support language capabilities, or whatever the case may be. And you can sort of break it down, and you can then guarantee you're able to deliver a certain amount of capability during that peak period if something goes wrong. And where does that fit into cyber? We can't protect everything to the same level. If we have everyone in the room here, our customers, this is our business, we can't protect everyone in the room at the same level of capability, because there's people walking out of the door and in the door. There's people with coats on and no coats on. There's people that are vaccinated and unvaccinated. There's people with colds and are sick and so forth. It's impossible for us to do that. So we need to identify who's critical to that service, and the way Paul put it is the value chain, and what are the people, the processes, the technologies, the vendors, the data sets, or whatever else that's required to deliver on that capability. And if you don't understand that, and you can't actually conceptualize that in your head, you're probably not going to be successful. But like,
I think also that, because obviously we're talking, this is big as well, with lots of resources as well and different things. So I think taking it also back slightly as well, like as CISOs, as Paul said, like it is our responsibility. They should challenge us. Sure, there's legislation that says you should do that, and yes, they should be better at that. But the reality is, they're not always going to do that. They don't understand their liabilities, and they should, and we should come up with better ways, and they should be better at that. But we also have a duty as CISOs to communicate risk, or outsourced vendors, or if you are taking security as a thing that you are doing, it is your job to go into that room and leave that room knowing that you have communicated the risk, so you don't own that risk. Like, if I'm in a room and I don't know that I've communicated well enough to the person on the other side of the table that what their risks are, and that it's their risk, not my risk, then I'm not doing my job right. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to that you have to communicate to the other people in the room and know that they understand that they own those risks. And if you're not able to do that, then you need to either bring in people who can help you communicate in that way and things like that, because the technical side of controlling security is important, but the communicating side of it is almost more important, because if you're not communicating that risk, then you're the one that's owning those risks a lot of the time.
Yeah, you've hit on some really good points there, because CISOs, there's generally 4 levels of CISO in the world. okay? And a level 4 is more of a business person, and normally someone who's homegrown within the organization. So if it's a bank, they know all about banking, and then they learned maybe cybersecurity secondary to that. A level 4 CISO gets over 1 million a year, okay? And the reason they get that is because of the accountability they have as well, because if there's a big attack, whatever, they generally don't work again. And they're personally accountable for that. But they're business people at that level, a level 4 CISO. Now, the term CISO means different things in different parts of the world. A CISO in North America will be talking to the board, and Neil's been lucky enough that he's had access to the board in his career and different things. But that's not the same for everybody. So you'll have somebody who was a network manager, became the IT manager, then became, oh, I think I'll call myself IT director now because I'm here 10 years, and blah, blah, blah. And then they give them title CISO. What qualifications? I'm dealing with an organization at the moment that somebody was there for 28 years and has never been educated in those 28 years, barred what they knew when they came through the door, but they called themselves a CISO. This is insane. It's a large enterprise. So the disparity and the differences is unreal. And then when you think of the industry itself, millions and millions and millions of open cybersecurity jobs, and the industry is made up of 10% women. Why? It's ridiculous. So there has to be a change within the whole piece, because those softer skills as well are also required. Communication. By the way, everybody's a certain age group here, but underneath that, they grow up communicating by texting each other and looking at screens all day long. Being able to walk in and hold a room and communicate and sell ideas, sell your opinion, sell what you're trying to do. That's power. That's what you need to be able to do. And CISOs need to be able to do that. They need to be able to sell their opinion, sell their idea, sell what they're suggesting that the board should do. And then that board will have confidence in them because they've given them assurance, and they will trust them, the ultimate trust that human, that they know what they're talking about and are going to follow their decision. Then you're a successful CISO.
Can I ask how we're going to resolve that kind of skills shortage then, Norman? You've
Yeah, I think
familiarity with a lot of...
we're all talking CISOs, etc., etc. Ireland Inc. as a country is a mid-market country. You know, the vast majority of the companies in Ireland don't have CISOs. You know, they just don't. But they need all the same information. They need all the same guidance that the bigger guys that they have. And, you know, and Neil has a team beneath him, and you know he's overall in it. But he has all those, hopefully, put all those resources in place, and is able to take the advice of those people. If you're a 30-man company, your business is still important. It's still important to Ireland Inc., if you like. But they need to know where and who's going to give them that advice. And that's really, you know, if I take it from a distributor point of view, we need to be able to give that information to our partners, who then need to be able to give that to their small companies. And that's the big issue. You know, they don't have the resources. They certainly don't have the knowledge. You know, this guy's selling widgets. He hasn't a clue about, you know, GDPR or anything else like that. And he's struggling, or she's struggling, I should say. The person is struggling to be able to achieve that. And the reseller market doesn't have those resources, doesn't have that knowledge either to be able to give that information across. And I think that's one of our biggest issues in Ireland, is, you know, how does our whole market, you know, understand all the compliance, you know, that's about today. You know, what AI, what the hell is AI, you know? It's going to change the way we do our business. We're going to get 50% more revenue next year if we deploy ChatGPT. You know, that's what they believe. And I think that's one of the things that the channel as a whole needs to be able to deliver to the marketplace. And you know, people in the, you know, the virtual CISOs, all them sort of people, that's their job, because the smaller industries, the smaller companies, they don't have that resource, you know. And Kevin, you may be able to talk to that.
Yeah, and it's you know, the right level of investment. So getting that message through, you know, and somewhat engaging with experts, or you know, to assist you with these type of positions. So we engage with multiple different types of organisations, from like that, the 30-man operation, 30-person operation, right through to, you know, up to a couple of thousand staff and so forth. And it's, again, how do you get benefit from that? You need to engage with your vendors. So, you know, the ones that want, you either just have it as a checkbox, and I go in and I make the presentations, But it's like that I have to really sell it to the right people, and it's making sure I'm talking to the right people. And that's my job. You know, you've hired me to bring in to do that, so that's what I need to do, that I'm talking not just to the head of IT, because if I'm doing that, I'm losing. You know, everyone in IT knows what to do, but the rest of the business may not be able to perform. And like, if we look at, you know, security awareness training, that's just been a massive failure, like, and we're responsible for that. You know, we always blame the users. Well, they clicked on the link, we tell them to do the training, but you know, they're still not getting, you know, following the instructions or not learning, and that's you know, that's on us. That's not on them. So it's, you know, to try and get the message through and repeatable, as we've talked about as well.
This circles back to the initial question I had about who owns it, and I suppose at the time I was talking about it at industry level, right? Like within our organisations, you know, who's the stakeholder, how do you communicate it? But if we're to go back to kind of failures, and I guess what I'm going to ask you is, what would be the ideal in terms of, say, even government support of people being able to access knowledge, under training for communicating within their organisation and so on? Because I think the only thing that I've seen really publicly recently has been, I can't remember what the website was called, like BA Already or useai.e, I can't remember what it was, but it was very much focused on, here's how you use well-known AI tools, right? If you ask ChatGPT a question like this, it was bizarre. I just remember one of our very kind of experts, commentators on that, going through the whole thing for us and going, at no place is this a small business owner looking at this going, right, what do I need to do? What are the benefits, the opportunities versus the risks within my organization? It was very much focused on using a tool that a big tech company has designed and that the horses bolted from, and that there's no necessarily, it's not really thinking about the bigger picture. Is that what we're missing, a bigger picture piece? What would you like to see happen? And we talk about the Ireland market, I think, would be really helpful for people in this room, and as you know, Norman painted a very good picture of what the Ireland market is largely like.
Yeah, I think like I've been working with the Oireachtas of the Irish government on cyber vision for Ireland, and that includes a fairly significant budget to train people and then bring people up in skills. And like, my department has grown significantly in the last couple of years, and I would look at my department, and I say technical, I'm probably using the word technical as in from an engineering technical perspective, because like, I think the regulatory and the risk and so forth are also technical, but not in the traditional technical terminology. So, you know, only half of my department are technical. You know, half of them aren't traditionally technical in the sense of, you know, engineering skills, soft skills are sort of really important. Coaching, mentoring are really important. So I think I keep on leaning back into simplicity. Like, we need to sort of create things that are simple and reusable. But for me, when I look at like the requirement that we have to develop people, we need to look at people's background. So like, if you take someone that's like, you know, brought their children up for 20 years and are coming back to work after being off for 20 years, they probably have a good education to start off with. They've been at home for 20 years. And what does that mean? It means they've been dealing with chaos, they've been dealing with budgets, they've been dealing with prioritization, they've been dealing with challenges, they've been dealing with lots of things. If you apply just a bit of capability on top of that, you're probably going to find someone that's like dynamite. If you lean into neurodiversity and you find someone that, like, you know, really can't sort of hold a conversation, can't sit in a room with other people, you know, you let them stay at home, you know, their pattern recognition is going to be off the charts. You know, put them in front of a screen and say, I want you to find all the vulnerabilities there, you're going to find the superstar. So not everyone is going to come in a cape and going to come in a sharp suit. There's different variations, and we need lots of different variations of people to sort of come together and do this. So it isn't about having a degree. It isn't about having like a CISP or whatever the certification is, but it is about, like, you know, being able to identify what is it you're good at and maximize on that with training and with mentoring and with coaching, and giving people confidence to do their job. And getting certifications is a real confidence boost. So when you're an engineer and you're like 22 and you're sort of going, I don't really have any confidence here, and getting some certifications, and it sort of really gives you that boost. People need to be brought on that journey, and people of our short tenure need to remember that we were like that when we were 22. and we were the shy one in the corner, or at least I was anyway. So we need to maximise on that, and the government need to sort of provide that sort of spectrum of training that we do have PhDs, but we also have 2-week courses to bring people into, and focus on special capabilities.
So providing the tools to build confidence, which leads to competence. Essentially, yeah.
I think the answer is to protect an organisation lie within that organisation. If you've got 5 people working for you, that's 5 people that can protect your organisation. If you have 50, that's 50 or 100 or whatever. You need to empower them with some knowledge. They care about the organisation. They probably love the company they work for. So you build in loyalty with some competence as opposed to compliance training. Click here, pass the test, all that kind of stuff. That's all dead and gone. 80% of the economy in Ireland are SMEs. There's so much more can be done for SMEs. They're easy, low-hanging fruit for cyber criminals to go after and everything else like that. We provide a free cybersecurity training course for all SMEs in Ireland and free ransomware training course. There's lots more other great organisations doing that. That's not what I'm talking about. But if you think every one of those SMEs has to deal with who? An accountant. Why aren't all the accountants trained on cybersecurity and do some sort of an assessment when people are filing their returns? That would up the game. Straight away, all the SMEs would have to say, oh, I'm doing my return, I also need to do my cybersecurity return, something like that. For all those sort of falling under that 50 employee threshold of NIS 2, and capture all of them as well, because we're all part of it, and it's the weak parts is where they're going to come in through the supply chain and everything else like that. But to keep this real, to keep this relevant, it should be up there with like a lovely revenue harp somewhere not pretty close to it or whatever, to get the focus it needs. It's a business issue. It's not an IT geek issue. There's personal accountability to it, you know, so they need to understand that. And there's also opportunity in it. If you do cybersecurity right, then you're doing trust right. Now, we're in a limited window of format and time here and all that kind of stuff, talk about that, but it's the most important thing and the key to success is establishing digital trust. If you go in and you meet a doctor in the HSE, probably half your age these days if you're going to see them, right, but you're going to trust them when they say some Latin phrase to you. Why? Because you trust the whole process. You trust doctors are going to give you some magic pill that's going to fix you or help you or tell you to go do something. We have to have that trust. When that trust is eroded and it's gone, and that is what Europe is shitting itself over, is that we will lose confidence in the financial system. It's interconnected, it's interdependent, hanging by a thread all the time from these different attacks. That's why the warnings come out every Christmas, keep cash under your bed, because we're not quite sure it's going to work over Christmas. And that's because of Vladimir Putin, and that's because of the different threat actors that we've talked about over the last few sessions. So it's very real, but we all have a part to play. We all have a part to play in this. So it's our responsibility to patch your phones. It's our responsibility to make sure if you buy a smart TV that you're patching it, don't have the default username and password on it, and that you're bringing home your work and you're working from there with confidential data and you're on like a really loose network sitting at home and your neighbours are watching what you're doing. You don't want that.
I think it's also like, it's our responsibility as the channel, taking it back to the channel, like, to remember that until very recently this was a completely unregulated channel. Like, people were doing what they wanted, so some companies were doing a brilliant job, other companies were just not, unfortunately. And that is changing. This is becoming a regulated industry. It has already changed, as you've already pointed out, and certainly in Europe and other areas like that, we are already under these, and if you don't know which of your clients come under DORA and NIS2 and things like that as a channel, then you are in trouble already because you are part of that supply chain. We need to not start looking at this as sort of, oh, which of the things do I need to try and achieve? Which ones do I regulation tell me? We just need to start doing things better in the channel. And part of that is communicating risk to our clients and talking to them regularly. So taking it on ourselves as the channel, through our distributors and our partners and our vendors, then through into the MSPs, ITSPs and MSSPs and all these people there, to just do a bit better at taking that responsibility on ourselves and to talking to our clients. And not just saying, oh, they can't be bothered, they don't bother turning it on, so I'm not going to bother talking to them. Actually going back to them and saying, look, I'm going to tell you what your risk is, and I'm going to give it to you because I don't want to own that. Like, so it's my responsibility to tell you what your risk is. You may not engage with that, but it's your risk, not mine. And that's what we need to be doing.
Great. Can I go to Kevin and Norman just before I go to the floor, because I'm mindful of our time. We've got 3 kind of, I think, strong messages there I hope people can take home. What would you like to see in leadership in the next 12 months? And it can be as ambitious as you like, and it can be for someone else.
Personally, I'd like to see the Irish government take the nettle in their hands and actually do something about it, rather than all the talk, all the scare tactics that go on. Go back to what Neil says. Go back to the fundamentals. Give people all the basics. Put all the basics in place, and then we can talk about the higher stuff later on. But it's a little bit like, I remember when I went to school, which was a while back, I struggled with mathematics. And the main reason I struggled with mathematics was because I was trying to do it rote, all the time. I didn't understand what the formula meant. I luckily came across a really good maths teacher who said, Norman, you're in the wrong place. You need to understand what maths is first. You need to understand the fundamentals of mathematics, and then you can actually understand the rest. And I think that's going straight back to what Neil said. I totally and utterly agree. We've got to make it simple. We've got to make it so people can deliver this, and we've got to actually also understand the business. So I say to all my guys that work for me, sales guys, you need to understand what the customer's business is. And then you need to look at it from their point of view, not a product you want to sell to them. That's bullshit. That's not what it's about. Understand what they're trying to achieve. And if you understand everything the customer knows, you can then present the right solution for them, rather than I get more commission for this. That's just a one-off piece of business. We want to repeat. We want to do the right thing time and time again. And and going back to fundamentals. And if somehow or another we put something in place that everybody that goes through school doesn't learn something from 20 years ago, actually learn something from today, where we are now in this world, what the risks are to businesses, I think that would be good.
Fantastic. Kevin?
Yeah, very similar to what others have said. I think about the Donald Rumsfeld quote. We have the known knowns, then you have the unknown knowns, and then the unknown unknowns. And I think if we can even just prioritize what we know our risks are, and start to manage them, rather than people say, in 5 years' time, AI is going to do this, this, and this. What can it do right now? And similarly, resources, I think, if you're speaking to leadership, is getting those quality resources. And, we've utilised onboarding students that have just come out of college, and it's worked really well because they're ready to be moulded, and they're willing to go on courses and learn and totally adapt to the way. So I find them really beneficial.
Helping people surmount the paralysis of it's too big a problem, I can't tackle it. I don't know if I have do I have a roving mic, or shall I go down? Can I borrow one? Yeah. Right, I guess I'm roving as well as the mic. We've a few minutes. Does anyone have a question? I'll pass this to you for our esteemed panelists. Here we go. And if there's anyone in particular you want to aim it at, just let me know.
If you're a security professional currently working, what advice do you give to them to keep on top of all the AI and everything? What do you think they should do to make them valuable for the organization, keep on top of all the things happening around? Like, we're hearing AI, cloud mythos, they're saying, it catches more what you can do as a pen tester. Or if you're working in a security engineer role in an organization, what things you advise for them to stay on top of this, and then how do they?
Okay. Yeah. So I think there's a couple of different aspects to how I'd answer that. Keeping on top of how fast AI is changing with tool sets is almost impossible, right? But my toolbox changes every day. 1 minute I'm thinking, this thing's great, blah, blah, blah. 3 weeks later, there's a competitor product there, it's 10 times better. So your toolbox will change all the time. However, at that higher level, the concepts around things like AI resilience, governance, oversight, accountability, all of those kind of things, that should not change. And that needs to be instigated into the leadership, because the tail will never wag the dog. So it doesn't matter how technical and great things are being done down on a technical AI level if the business is not connected to all of that. So the key to success is get the business educated, get them to understand what the responsibilities are, and get them to provide the structure, the protection, the mechanism, and everything for you to embrace and use AI effectively in a safe way. They are very powerful tools, AI, and if you get it wrong, you'll get it wrong big time. It could be the end of a business, no problem at all. It'll end a business. So it's about getting this right. I was going, when we were talking there about the leadership piece, if I just segue for a second on that, was, if you think of any business, or Ireland Inc. we mentioned as a business, unique opportunity to embrace everything that's going on. The geopolitical madness that's going on, the Trump madness, the fact that the Israeli embassy just left the room a few minutes ago, was listening to everything that was going on, like 6 minutes ago, right? All of this that goes on. This is a geopolitical space we are in, and all of those things. Ireland is a neutral country, pretty much loved by everybody around the world. all that kind of stuff. But also we have the smartest and best communicators in the world and the smartest people in all of this space. And now with the EU presidency, we have a unique opportunity to actually embrace and take advantage of all of that. Am I skeptical? Do I think the Irish government will do something about it? Right, I hope. Because there is a unique opportunity here, because the world is at a really, really crisis point with all this stuff. Meta, 10% of the jobs gone because of AI. They don't want any regulations. All the big companies, Mercedes-Benz, none of them want any AI regulations. They all want to free-for-all and do what the fuck they want with AI. And that's wrong. It's really, really wrong. And we're all going to pay for it, and our children will pay for it. So something needs to be done. And I don't know whether Ireland government or Ireland Inc. has the backbone and the balls to deal with that. But I wish they did. Because there's people on this platform here could help. There's lots of people within Ireland. We have the smartest people, honestly, on a world stage to deal with this kind of stuff. And we have all the big players here in Ireland. But where is the organisation? Where's the coordination to make that happen? So that's my tip as well.
Does anyone else have quite practical advice for this gentleman?
I think sometimes, I'm sorry, I just think sometimes we freeze in the headlights of the technological change. So I see so many people not having an AI policy because they're spending so long rewriting their AI policy on a weekly basis because they can't keep up with all the technology they're trying to put in their AI policy. And I'm like, just stop doing that. Just put a policy in actually that's got, talk about the ethics and the ownership and who owns the responsibility. Now let's start there in the policy you're putting out there and stop, because that's the piece that matters here a lot of the time. It's like who's owning the responsibility, as Paul was just saying, who's owning the output of what's going on. We haven't lost that, and we shouldn't have lost that because the human needs to stay in the loop. You can get those pieces out the door faster if they stay true. Yes, the tooling moves hourly and moment by moment, but if we can get some of the control around the piece of control, the bits we can own, then that makes life a lot easier.
If I understood your question correctly, I could be wrong now about this. I'm not disagreeing with what the gents have said, that's all accurate, but you need to sort of look at it yourself and think about, because this is a really big spectrum of activity, so what is it that excites you? What is it you're naturally good at? What is it that, like, is going to get you up in the morning? What is going to make you keep going in the evening? And cybersecurity, cyber resilience, risk is a big space, and if you can find something that is genuine and exciting you, you'll never work a day in your life. And I spent about 10 years trying to figure that out, and I wish I had someone told me when I was at the start of that journey. If you can lean into your natural instinct and what that is, the rest is. Everything the guy said is correct, but it's just going to be a far more exciting and a far more engaging activity because this is really stressful. This is a really difficult role to be in, and if I didn't take the approach that I'm taking, I wouldn't sleep at night, and I probably wouldn't be here either. So it's really important to do that.
That's a really helpful answer because we're trying to keep people in the industry, I imagine. We are at time, but if anyone has a really burning question, we could take one more. Or are we good? I think we had a really comprehensive chat there with lots of angles covered, so I'm not surprised. Okay, well, I'm going to let people get the Lewis, get a horse, get a bus. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.